Hello, I'm Jordan, head of community at Zimbali AI, the creators of Orocash. I'm a lawyer. I graduated from Howard University School of Law in 2021, and I've been an observer and student of blockchain technologies and distributed ledger technologies since around 2009, when I mined my first Satoshis on my high school laptop. That's more than enough about me. The man of the hour is here. I'm excited to be talking to the amazing, awesome, incredible Dr. Sriram Nagaraj, Chief Technology Officer of Zimbali AI. Dr. Sriram Nagaraj is a computational scientist and engineer by training and has made several research contributions in the field of numerical analysis and machine learning. Most recently, Sriram is hooked on the interaction between distributed ledger technology and applications and artificial intelligence. Sriram firmly believes that AI and DLT go hand in hand, and together they will empower decentralized finance to achieve things that were previously impossible, particularly in developing economies. Definitely agree with that. Sriram is also passionate about making a positive impact on society and views his technical skills as the medium to achieve that goal. Prior to joining Zimbali, Sriram was a quantitative specialist with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. There, he built AI models for supervisory and regulatory applications and risk management. He was also involved with stress testing and model risk management. Sriram has a bachelor's degree from UT Dallas, a master's degree from Rice University in engineering, and a doctorate in computational science, engineering, and mathematics from the Odin Institute at UT Austin. So let's get into some questions. Let's start at the beginning.
Sure.
Tell us about your parents and where you grew up.
Right. So I was born in the Indian city of Mumbai, as it's called now. It was formerly called Bombay. So we're a Tamil-speaking family, and pretty sort of middle-class upbringing in India. My family and I, we moved to the U.S. when I was about between 5 or 6 years old. That was basically, if you think about it historically, that was when India basically as a country opened up to, sort of moved away from a command type economy to a free market type economy. And so there was a lot of growth, economic growth at the time. And so sort of riding that wave, my dad basically moved over my parents moved over from Mumbai to Columbus, Ohio, which is where I did my elementary school. And so basically we lived in Columbus, Ohio, and I think about almost a year in Cupertino, California. And then at about the end of 5th grade, I think, we kind of had to move back to India because my grandfather was not well and he really needed support with him. And so, I did middle and high school in India in the city of Chennai. And then once I finished high school, it's kind of like, where do I go for college and all that. So, as a family, we kind of decided to move back. And so I did my undergrad at the University of Texas at Dallas in electrical engineering. And I got a master's, as you mentioned, at Rice University, also in ECE. While I was in high school is when I sort of got hooked onto mathematics, and sort of math puzzles and that kind of thing remains an interest of mine till today. My undergrad had a heavy dose of mathematics. I almost got a dual degree in mathematics along with electrical engineering, but that would have needed me to stay an extra semester to finish the coursework, and I was like, nah, it's good. So I sort of didn't get the other degree. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, I would think of myself as a sort of both an engineer and a mathematician. So.
Absolutely. And you have a PhD in computer science, engineering, and mathematics from UT Austin. So that's quite a lot of scholarship. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So so after I finished my master's, I was actually thinking what I want to do, and I really liked engineering, but I was still drawn more towards sort of mathematics. Um, and that's when I kind of stumbled upon the Odin Institute. And that was kind of exactly what I was looking for, in the sense that, um, you know, the degree program for the Odin Institute is set up in such a way that when you do your PhD, you actually have to focus on computation. You have to have some sort of engineering application for your work. So it can't be sort of like a pure math degree or a pure computation degree. But it's also got to have a healthy amount of sort of hard analysis or mathematics. And so that's kind of what I was looking for. And so I really loved the program. And so I went to the Odin Institute. At the time, it was actually called the Institute for Computational Engineering and Sciences, and so the acronym was ICES. And when you say that, it sounds like ISIS. So I'm happy that they have changed the name to the Odin Institute, named after the founder, Dr. Odin, who's still around, by the way. So yeah, that's kind of like how I ended up in that area. So this was really good because it was during the course of my PhD that I actually learned a lot about high performance computing, and or HPC as it's called. And so my PhD was actually funded in part by the U.S. Air Force. And so for the latter half of my dissertation, I was focusing on laser simulations, and we made annual trips to the Air Force Base to present our work. And it was really cool because the application was that so basically the U.S. Air Force, I don't know when this is going to happen, but eventually is looking to convert sort of missile systems to lasers. And so, for instance, the kind of thing that they were talking about was mounting, if you can imagine, basically sawing off the top of a Boeing plane, and then mounting a laser on top of that, and having that circle the North Pole and being refueled periodically. And so that would be like sort of the ultimate deterrent, because it'll never land. It's just going to be orbiting, and if there's any sort of enemy missile in the air, it can actually just vaporize it before it. So anyway, so this is like super science fiction type stuff, and that was very forward looking. But the problem was that the materials that are being fabricated for all of these lasers, sort of burn up. So in other words, because they can't sustain such high power when they're being, experimented with in the lab. And so, so for instance, I was working on fiber optic lasers. And so these lasers are basically go through a fiber, optical fiber. And to fabricate this fiber, it's about, at the time, it was 10 cents per micron. So a micron is 10 to the minus 6 meters. So a meter long, piece of this fiber is about $100,000. And so when you need something for large simulation or large laser experiments, it's about 10 meters. It's literally $1 million per fiber. And these fibers are routinely, they burn up because, when you do the experiments, if there's any sort of impurity or some kind of anomaly in the crystal structure, the fiber can't sustain the power, so it just explodes. So you literally burned $1 million. And so the Air Force felt that there was better use for taxpayer dollar. And so the idea was you can set up a computer simulation which simulates the entire functioning of the fiber, so you can actually run through all of the scenarios in setting up an optical fiber experiment. And once you've sort of localized what the parameters are into sort of a range, you can then go to the lab and fabricate exactly what you need rather than try willy-nilly. And so my dissertation was sort of like a first step in that process. Um, and so, yeah, I had to learn like I had no background in like quantum physics or anything. So I had to learn a little bit of that, optics and all of this kind of stuff. But it was also, like I said, learning mathematics. So we did prove some nice theorems and a lot of computing. So it was like really broad, scholarship that I had to pick up. And so that was also an opportunity for me to actually work with people. Like I was working with physicists, and it seems like a perennial sort of thing that mathematicians and physicists are generally talking about the same thing, but they're talking about the same thing in sort of different languages. And so being able to communicate with, on technical matters with someone, um, who might be approaching things from a different point of view is, because usually, when you start doing research, you kind of like are focused on your area so much, and like you have your little network, and so everyone knows what you're talking about. And so it's only when you talk or you have to work with people outside of your sort of um, you know close knit group of people that you actually have to like you know think about how you're explaining things and all that. So that was actually on the softer side. I think that really helped me a lot in the next step of my career, which was with the Fed. So
that is an incredible breadth of experience, and I would need an education to even properly inquire into some of those things you were talking about. I want to know how many millions of dollars you saved the U.S. government with those experiments. So I just wanted to ask. I know a lot of people who go through the type of academic rigor that you have and earned a PhD. There's a lot of pressure to go into academia.
yeah.
Why did you decide to not go that route?
Yeah, so that's like a pretty, difficult question to ask. And I think if you ask this of 10 different people with PhDs, you'd get 10 different answers. So, and then, sort of, I guess I'll tell you what my opinion or the rationale behind my decision was. So I love research, right? And I love scholarship. I regularly still read, research papers. I still, follow the research in, machine learning and computing as best as I can. And so, and teaching also was a great, sort of part of my graduate education. I had to actually teach courses and, I really loved that aspect of it. But what I also found was that, particularly in many departments today, in STEM especially, right, is a lot of these research groups are kind of run like a startup almost. Like you have your main professor, main PI, principal investigator, and you have a few postdocs, and then you have like sometimes a small band, sometimes an army of graduate students. And so they're all sort of working towards this goal. And you apply for funding, right? And then you get your funding either from for a variety of different sources, and sort of the research direction that you focus on, that you sort of um, you sort of pound away, is determined by largely from where your funding comes from, and what your funders are interested in, right? So I ended up working on you know, quantum optics or whatever, optic fiber stuff, more because that's sort of where the general direction of the research funding was coming from. And so, of course, I still was able to do a lot of other things on the side, but the general sort of direction of the work was such, right? And so, that's kind of like what we do as a start. Like we're interested in something, we apply for funding, right? And we get VCs or whatever, and they fund us, and then we do our work, right? And so it kind of felt that again, I'm not an expert on this, but it seems like this trend of like sort of heavily market driven research in academia is something that has become more and more prevalent in the last couple of decades. And so, I kind of really felt that, that was sort of like sort of an eye opener for me in a certain sense, because when you're undergrad, you kind of look at professors and you're taking courses, and it's like you feel academia is sort of like this, you can do whatever you want, it's just total scholarship and that kind of thing. But then when you actually go through the motions, you actually find that there's a lot of market forces that are at play. So then I realized that, hey, maybe I can still do interesting work. I can probably still do, innovation and all of that without having to be within the confines of an academic environment. And I found also that, especially today, if you look at some of the top computing conferences, if you look at the top machine learning conferences, there's a healthy interaction between industry and academia. And I think the lines, especially for cutting edge research, are kind of blurred. And very often you find that departments or research centers within departments are often sort of test beds for a lot of industry research. And so I just find that that distinction is, becoming more artificial, right, as the days progress. And so I kind of said, I kind of decided that, let's just go the industry route, right? And so I do miss the teaching part, though, I will say. I try to make amends for that, however I can. But I think certainly the research and scholarship is, it might be attenuated slightly in the kind of work that I'm doing now, but I still get time to, be sort of, if not actively involved, at least passively involved. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you get to do research and then implement,
Sure.
and you're getting to teach right now. So,
Right.
you're kind of living the dream.
Yeah.
So after you received your PhD, you went to work at the Federal Reserve, specifically
Right.
the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta.
Mhm.
How did you end up making that choice, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, so that jump was actually, I will definitely admit that was, that was a calculated risk in a certain sense, because I had, literally zero background in financial banking at that stage. What sort of got me started there was I took a course on stochastic calculus when I was in graduate school. And the professor who was teaching it, she's kind of like a world expert in mathematical finance. So a lot of the examples that came up in the class, came from asset pricing, from like, stochastic optimization and all of this kind of stuff, right? So I had to learn about, a little, at least as much asset pricing as needed. And that sort of like was kind of like interesting mathematics. Mathematically, it was very interesting. And I followed that up later with, I forget the exact name of the course, but it was something to do with like Bayesian statistics. And I had done a lot of the statistics and stuff during, my undergrad and master's, but it was sort of the applications that were being talked about in that course, because there was applications in biology and like molecular dynamics and all of that kind of stuff. So it was like really cool. And then with my, acquired computational background, I could see that these are not just theories, right? These are like actually things that you can implement in code and really do stuff with it. And so that was simmering in my mind. And then, sort of going back to the Oda Institute, one of the biggest things that, our founder, like Dr. Odin would emphasize is that traditionally, you know, since the time of Newton, I guess, science was generally, built upon two pillars. One of them was theory, and the other was experiment. So you would experimentally, observe something, and then you'd go and then be like, okay, can I develop a theory that explains that observation that I just made, right? And then you'd go back and forth between these two sort of iteratively. But since about the 50s or 60s, computation, particularly simulation, has sort of become sort of a third pillar for science. And because there are, things or situations such as burning, $1 million worth of optical fiber, like you can't reasonably do that experiment enough number of times to come up with a theoretical model that explains that, right? I mean, you could if you had a huge amount of resources, but then that's a prime example where simulation and simulation studies kind of come to your rescue, because you can, using computation, you can actually understand a lot of the phenomena that you're trying to study, and you can actually go now between theory and experiment, and take a pit stop at computation or simulation. And so that feeds back a lot positively to both theory and experiment. And so, that thing was also going on in my head. And so, I started reading about all of these risk models and quantitative risk. And I found that there's basically the same thing again here, because people are basically going through and doing scenarios of, in this case, it was financial data, right? So you use financial data to predict whatever, but it was sort of like the same, you know, philosophically, you're kind of doing the same thing. So that's what sort of got me really interested in this kind of stuff. And then, I think it was my fourth year, I saw this flyer for the quantitative fellowship program. Before that, so usually when people move from like a heavy math or a heavy physics background to finance, it's usually, some hedge fund somewhere, and they're building all of these sort of exotic models, and that's typically the trajectory that the quants, right, would take. And I probably would have gone that route, but had I not seen this flyer for the quantitative fellowship program. So this program is sort of like a flagship program run by the Federal Reserve System. And the idea there is to provide people basically like me, like not having any or very minimal amount of banking finance background, but having some sort of strength in some quantitative discipline. And then instead of being like a super focused quant and be like, hey, build me a model for, this particular type of portfolio, you're kind of like given again, a broad experiential sort of education in banking and finance. And so from the point of view of supervisory or regulatory, from that perspective, right? And so that really appealed to me. So I went and visited them, and I learned what they were doing, and it was like really really nice. And so when they made me the offer, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take it. So I learned a lot. Though I was with the Atlanta Federal Reserve, I collaborated, I think, with 5 or 6 other Federal Reserve, other Federal Reserves in the system. There are 12, by the way, for those who don't know. There are 12 Federal Reserve systems, or one Federal Reserve System. There are 12 Federal Reserve banks within that system. And so, so I ended up working on, quantitative risk management. I focused a lot on credit risk. And all the while I was looking and it's actually applying machine learning models to all of these areas. And I was also involved in stress testing models. So these were the models that sort of came up after 2008 as a means of sort of making sure that such a catastrophic sort of thing doesn't happen again. And so I was working, again, it was a lot of simulation studies, with stress testing models, right? And so the DFAST, CCAR stress tests basically are, again, a simulation study that, in this case, you're looking at simulations of loss numbers. and making sure that, losses are basically under check in terms of available capital, or how much capital do you have to allocate and things like that. So, you know, the quantity of interest was different, but sort of philosophically it was kind of the same. I worked also with markets data, so stock data, CDS spreads, that kind of thing. A lot of my work was also with NLP models, or natural language processing models, and sort of the interaction between NLP. So I'll give you an example. So I was working also with, um, you know, earnings transcript data. So like, companies have earnings calls, and so you have transcripts of these calls. So these are actually text. So like, it'd be the CEO of whatever bank or whatever talking, right? And you'd have like text about it. And then one of the projects I was looking at was like, okay, can I, and this is almost like something that we see every day with Twitter. There is a CEO who said something, and so how did these words affect the stock movements of, their stock, or others in their tier, right? And so I was actually using machine learning models to look at that correlation and see if we can actually come up with a model that sort of explains that. So, or at least a predictive model, be like, okay, so such and such and such was said by the CEO, right? How does this impact? How is this going to impact, right? You know, today, next week, whatever, right? And it was kind of really interesting project. So it was really cool. I really liked it. So anyway, that was the kind of stuff I was doing there. But again, I think I had to sort of uh, this was again an experience where I was working with. I remember like the first few months when I joined the Fed, it's like I was kind of like, and they were really nice. I mean, they made me feel at home and things like that. But I was the only non-bank person there. They're non-banking, sort of non-finance background person, at least in the initial few months. Of course, I picked up a lot of this stuff, subsequently. But it was just, again, an exercise in being able to communicate with your colleagues, your collaborators who don't necessarily speak the same language, technical language as you do, but still trying to get stuff done, and trying to do interesting work. And so I think particularly that experience really convinced, you know, I was able to convince myself that, hey, I can actually do, sort of multi-collaborative kind of stuff. And so, that's a great experience.
That's absolutely fascinating. I keyed in on the what do you call it, the NLP,
Yeah.
or the
Natural
can you say what it, natural language processing?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, everything you just said was fascinating. That part just came to my mind because I know that, like, for example, you mentioned Twitter, and like Elon Musk, tweets Doge, and then it goes up, and like there's a lot of phenomenon like that. And I wonder, if you applied that to other medium than just these sort of private conversations. But so I know that you met Sultan Moore, the CEO of Zimbali.ai, CEO and founder, at the Atlanta Federal Reserve. Can you talk about how you met Sultan?
Sure. Yeah. So I think Sultan. So I joined the Fed mid of 2018, and I think Sultan had joined maybe a month or two before I had. So he was also relatively a new employee, and so I just went around talking to people and shaking hands and so on. And so Sultan was our cyber security, cyber risk expert, and there were not too many of those in the system at the time. And so I was like really interested to get to know Sultan's work and that kind of thing. And so that's how we started talking. And Sultan was also, and of course remains, very interested in computing and sort of the interaction between cybersecurity, cyber risk, and hardware and all of that kind of stuff. He knows a ton in that area, and he's very eager to like see how all of this stuff, comes together, right? And so like I kind of didn't really have like a background, right, in all any of the cybersecurity stuff, right? So, and I kind of knew how cryptography works and like elliptic curves and all of that kind of stuff, but like it was kind of academic sort of knowledge. And so Sultan and I spoke, about, he taught me a lot of, about just like the system side of things, right? I mean, how what does a cyber risk event or a cyber risk, I mean, how do you analyze that, right? And so we had several conversations in the beginning, and then we sort of like also became kind of friends, and so we ended up having coffee once in a while, lunch, meeting each other, uh, at work, and so that's sort of how we uh, you know um, came into contact, and it was a mutual respect and admiration. So
So how did you go from this relationship as friends to ultimately joining the company that Sultan founded?
yeah, so I think even when we were at the Fed together, we would be talking about blockchain and that kind of thing. So at the time, I didn't know too much about you know the blockchain technology and that kind of stuff. I mean, I knew that there was this crypto wave that's riding through, and but I was no like crypto trader or any of this kind of stuff, right? And so but Sultan was very aware of all of these things, and so he uh sort of, in order for me to actually communicate with him, I actually had to go and learn a lot of this kind of stuff. So that's when I sort of went and I learned, okay, what is all of this, right? And so we had already started talking about this general area, right, when we were at the Fed together, and then when Sultan went, so this QFP program lasted for 2 years, and then I became sort of full time after that, and then I was invited to stay an additional year with working with the board, and in DC, and then COVID hit and all of that happened. But I think it was during that time that Sultan left and joined Facebook, and then of course we were still in communication, and then uh, he started sending me like interesting articles and things like that, and he was like, "Hey, we want to build one of these things," and that was the, I guess, predecessor of the Just Pay Me platform, and we were talking about point of sale devices and various different things, and then it was shortly after COVID hit. I can't remember, sometime during the COVID period, that Sultan was like, "Hey, would you be interested if to join what we're doing?" And I was like, "Yeah, that definitely seems like an interesting proposition," because by that time I kind of like knew that particularly DLT technology offers a very unique type of data modality that can where machine learning AI models can really be very powerful. So I was definitely interested at the time, and then we kept talking, and earlier this year is when I was also looking for greener pastures, if you would, and Sultan, called me up and said, "Hey, we are ready to go. You want to get in the car?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And then earlier this year, I kind of moved over to and formally join Zimbali. So that's kind of how it went.
And so since joining and becoming the chief technology officer,
Yeah.
what have you been working on?
So when I joined as chief AI officer, and then I inherited the CTO position along the way. And so in the beginning, so currently we're working on sort of three different types. Two are related, but generally three different products. One of them is our CBDC, or central bank digital currency platform. So we've built out a end-to-end central bank digital currency management system where an authority, financial authority like central bank or city or whatever can mint tokens, money or NFTs basically, and distribute those to commercial banks, if you would, or other entities that receive that money and distribute that to the public. And then you actually have users who can download the app on their phone and make payments on their phone using the NFTs that are being minted, right? So this is a complete self-contained end-to-end central bank digital currency platform. And so that's, that already exists in as a sandbox version, and it's available actually to download for Android for the user. Of course, the central bank and the commercial bank wallets are not, available for download. So, but if you want to use it, just try it out, the sandbox version. It's not sort of that hard to use. That's one. The second thing is our Orocash app, and the idea there is basically to have imagine like Venmo and international wire transfers and GoFundMe all in one app. And so why would you want to do that? Well, think about it, they're all same, right? They're all just making transactions. But each one of them has, so if you're looking at international wire transfers, if, and I know this from personal experience, if I want to make a wire to someone in India, the fees are exorbitant, right? And so, but, with DLT technology, particularly with the Hedera Hashgraph platform, which is what we're using. It's a third generation DLT platform that we're using. And so transactions are a fraction of a fraction of the standard cost. And so, because they're all transactions, technically they're kind of doing the same thing. And so putting international transfers, international wires on the platform makes sense. Now with GoFundMe type scenario, you actually have an auditability issue currently. So, we hear this all the time in the news that, someone basically frauds GoFundMe because they're like, oh, something bad happened to me. And then like a whole bunch of people contribute money and then they just run to Vegas with it, right? I mean, that's like a huge issue with the current platform. But if you use the Hedera-based DLT platform, what you can do is actually you can, using smart contracts, you can actually have a bunch of people come in and be like, okay, we want to contribute to that cause, and this is how much we want to contribute to, and these are the rules of contribution, right? And this is, this is how the recipient ought to use the money. So in other words, let's say someone's, we want to come together and help a person rebuild their home after a hurricane. We could be like, okay, we're gonna, like, Jordan, myself, and a bunch of other people are gonna come together, form what's called a quick bank. That's sort of the trademark name that we use. So we spawn, right, a quick bank, which is basically a group wallet to put all of our contributions into that one pot. And then, okay, well, we want this person to rebuild their home, but we want, these are the terms and conditions, right? So they have to, comply. And so these are rules that Jordan, myself, and others who are contributors can actually vote upon. And then once the funds have been distributed, we can actually track, okay, did they really use this amount for, so many dollars for lumber? Did they really go to Sherwin-Williams and buy the paint? And so we can track the flow of funds, and make sure that there is no fraudulent activity that's happening. And so, um, of course, something that resides on top of all of that is sort of AI analytics for the entire platform. And so that's kind of our second um, uh, use case or application. And finally, what we're working on is what we're calling the compute constellation. And this goes back to some ideas that Tilton exchanged way back when, right, during even the Federal Reserve times, was if you look at point of sale devices, point of sale is where wealth is basically created, right? And so if you think about point of sale devices, that's sort of like where the exchange of financial exchanges happen. So think about vending machines, ATM machines, cash registers, and all of these things. They're all running transactions, right? And so the idea is kind of novel. So if I could, sort of put computing devices, GPUs, say, right, on point of sale devices, those GPUs or those processors can be used to run transactions during the time when they need to be running transactions. But during sort of the off season when it's there's say there's a vendor who is open 9 to 5, at 6 p.m. they shut off the lights. If they just keep the lights on their register, there is this compute unit that's available for compute. So we can actually link together all of these vendors, all of these point of sale devices, and form a huge compute cluster, right? Which we're calling the compute constellation. And so what's basically happening is this huge load balancing during the daytime when all of the points of sale are being used for everyday activity. All of the compute is being used for those purposes. And then during nighttime, they're basically lending their hardware resources for someone else who might be in need of, some number of floating point operations or flops, right? And so you can actually loan out or do like an Airbnb for your compute, for your hardware, um, and basically earn money for it. So like you could, if you were a vendor, you could just buy like you know 5 of Zimbali boxes, put them in your vending machine, and let it go. I mean, it's going to be generating revenue for you, right? And so if I was a customer in need for compute resources, I could be like, hey, Zimbali compute constellation, I need basically X amount of compute resources. I will pay this amount of money, and so that money will be used to pay the vendors for their hardware, and that's also how we plan to generate our revenue. So it's actually revenue on both sides. So you will be generating revenue from running transactions, right? And then also for the compute services. So, and because point of sale devices are so ubiquitous, um, that's why, for instance, it makes a lot of sense to attach to the point of sale devices. Um, Add on top of that, if you want to use compute resources for whatever, that's fine. But if you want to actually if you are actually the vendor themselves, and you don't have access to any sort of fancy analytics yet. So imagine like a mom and pop sort of sandwich shop. They've been in business for 30 years. Um, they can actually use our platform and have a subsidized access to machine learning compute resources, and they can actually have analytics and be like, oh, Saturdays are when pancakes are really, really popular. Oh, okay, well then let's arrange our offerings in such a way that maximizes our profit, right? And so this is insight that they can actually derive from their point of sale devices. And so that's kind of how we're planning on integrating the transactional component with a almost purely computational or sort of compute heavy platform. So I guess you could view this as kind of an alternative to the cloud, uh, sort of scaled down. But eventually, who knows, right? I mean, this could be particularly if you think about it this way. Right now, it's like 2:30 p.m. Central Time. In India, it's like 1 a.m. I'm pretty sure no points of sale or very few points of sale machines are open in India right now, right? But if I needed some extra compute juice now, if there is a point of sale device sitting over there that I can actually number crunch, use it to number crunch, I can get additional compute resources now, right? And so where would these compute resources be used? Well, hospitals, for instance, have to run so many, they have to crunch so much of compute for medical imaging devices, right? And so they could actually have access to all of this at a more sort of at a rate that's better than the cloud, right? And so this is kind of how we're kind of looking at this offering. So anyway,
That's amazing.
yeah.
So you can see how between the Orocash app functionalities and the
Right.
compute constellation, the tremendous value for communities in terms of building wealth through commerce.
Absolutely.
That's incredible.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, so I mean, like, the community aspect is certainly the big thing about Zimbali is allowing communities to take ownership and take stock of their own financial freedom. And I think both with the Orocash platform and the compute constellation idea, it allows for communities to basically do a lot of it offers a lot of financial um, um, features for them to actually really take stock of their own finances. So, for instance, I was talking about credit risk earlier. One of the things that we'd like to do is in economies, particularly that do not generally have like a equivalent of a FICO score. So again, I'm thinking Southeast Asia, Africa, predominantly cash-based economies. But if they are running the Oro cash platform, we can back out, say, just purely based on transactional information, a sort of a alternative to a credit score, which otherwise would not have been even possible because they've been using cash. And if a person switches from cash to digital today, in the traditional way, you would actually have to wait, I don't know how many years for you to build up a credit score. And here's the catch here. In order for you to have a good credit score, you need to have paid. You kind of have to have a credit. Access to credit is a precondition for you to build a better credit score. And so it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But what about economies where it doesn't even exist, right? And so this is where I think Zimbali's platform can really do a great deal of good, because if you swap out from cash to digital payments, you're going to generate a ton of transactional data very, very quickly. Because if everyone's going to be paying with cash, say in India, I mean, like when I go to India, even now, I pay everything in cash. And so I make like, I don't know, 10 transactions a day in cash. And so if I'm there for a month, that's 300 transactions. Multiply by everyone in my family, that's like thousands of transactions a week. And so I can back out a lot of information, right, about how much am I spending here? How regularly do I spend money there? Am I buying, vegetables, every single week at this given rate? And so all of this can be used to back out. Now, if I needed to get a loan, can I stop, can I shave off a little bit from my vegetable purchases? So maybe I don't buy, maybe I buy, you know, delicacies only once every so often and use that to get myself pre-qualified for a loan, right? And that's a huge thing that you can actually do with our platform. And so for people who, in these economies where they don't have, an ability to take a loan to send their kids to school or to send their kids to college or whatever, right? Or buy a house or whatever, because they can't just go knock knock to a bank and be like, hey, give me a loan. I mean, that just doesn't exist.
Mhm.
And so by running all of these analytics, you can actually see where people are spending purely based on their transactional, history. And of course, they keep making transactions. I mean, like, you know, rickshawalas in India, make so many transactions every day, right? And so it's not as though they're financially, they're not like financially aloof. It's just they're the current financial system is such that they are shutouts from the system. We want to bring them in and perform, provide a platform by which they can get included and actually have a record of their financial existence.
Right. So I'm seeing how the access to both data for people who are spenders and also for vendors, and then also for the access to credit scoring that could give them access to credit
Exactly.
for individuals, but especially for vendors. And then also I see how with the point of sale devices being part of a compute constellation and actually being an income generating tool, it would make point of sale devices more affordable for people in places where that has not been affordable in the past and have such a device. And then that device would enable both them and the community to then start doing digital payments and collect that data. And so I see how these things exponentially magnify by each other. So I'm seeing the vision very clearly in the way that you're expressing it. So let me ask a personal question. So
Sure.
with this work you've been doing, moving from the Federal Reserve to Zimbali, becoming the CTO and working on these amazing projects that you were just describing, how has that experience been for you on a personal level?
Yeah. So I think, at the end of the day, we are a startup. And so I think we face the challenges that, all startups face, particularly because we have exposure to the crypto, sort of world. Uh, we are, prone to the sort of volatilities of the crypto winter, though, though we don't have much overt interaction with the vicissitudes of that world. I think it's just those kinds of challenges do exist, and so that's for me personally. Having to be at the helm of all of this, I think was a very new experience for me. I have been, sort of in sort of technical, lead positions in the past when I was with the Fed. But there's a difference between in terms of the scale of responsibility, and so I've had a lot of you know uh, very fruitful experiences growing as an individual into this role, and I think I'm very thankful for the opportunity. But yeah, no, in terms of surmounting challenges and sort of planning ahead and all of those kinds of things. This was a very, it gave me a lot of opportunities to sort of exercise those skills. And also, I think just interacting now with, the community at large, I think was again something very, a very, very good opportunity. And doing this kind of thing, I mean, is something new. I haven't really, been interviewed too much at all. So it's certainly, but I, I think as a person, I've grown a lot because of this opportunity. I think also, the growth, the leadership, but also just keeping myself accountable, I think is something that but that's something that came already in graduate school. I think in terms of uh, having to sort of claw your way out of difficulties, and that's kind of like a kind of skill or whatever that you pick up. Uh, I think every successful person who goes through that endeavor, sort of has to, have very thick skin and very strong teeth. Um, so I think both of those were very helpful to me in my current role.
Absolutely. Thick skin, strong teeth. If you
Yeah.
can hold on and not let go.
Yeah.
Let's see. Tenacious, tenacity. So let's talk a little bit more about you. So I
Sure.
know a few things. I know that you recently moved into a new house
Mhm.
that you purchased.
Right.
You have a young son,
Yeah.
and your wife is getting a very cool master's degree.
Right.
Can you tell us about those things
Sure.
as we start to draw to a close?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got married when I was in graduate school, and we moved from Austin to Atlanta in 2018. And then COVID hit and all that. And then my um, wife's technical background was actually, she was also, engineering type background. But, having, come to the US and having had several, really um, eye-opening experiences just working with people. She actually wanted to go back to graduate school with for master's in public health. So, and then I think the entire COVID situation also, um, was an eye-opener for all of us, right? But I think there was a certain sense of urgency and a need for that kind of skill. And so as fate would have it, she didn't quite get the program that she wanted in the Atlanta area, but she had applied in Texas, and she did get admission into the Texas program that she liked. So we actually moved back to Texas, and working remotely was one of the things positives that came out of COVID. And so we moved back last year to Texas. And the one thing I think I will never really forgive myself is mistiming the housing market, particularly in Austin, so badly. I think when we left, I think 6 months after we left is when house prices in Austin went totally crazy. And so, but anyway, we were back, and we went under contract. It took about a year, more than a year, to build a home, but we're finally back here, and just settling into the new home. My son is going to be 3 next week. He is a real energizer bunny. And so he really loves vehicles of all kind, particularly construction vehicles. And so he's, especially now that we have a yard, he takes this little set of construction vehicles out to the backyard and starts digging and moving stuff. And so yeah, he really loves that kind of stuff. So
Very
and
cool.
my,
Very
my
cool.
wife, as you mentioned, yeah, she's getting a master's in public health, and her passion is actually yoga. So so like we have like competitive, martial arts or whatever, competitive bodybuilding. In India, you actually have this history of competitive yoga, believe it or not. And so she is actually in her earlier days, she was actually a champion in some of these competitive yoga competitions. And so one of the things that she's actually actively researching about and very passionate to bringing to fruition is using yoga and allied areas such as mindfulness meditation and various breathing techniques and all of these kinds of things as preventive mechanisms in the public health arena, um, particularly because it's largely cost effective. And so one of the things that her research found was that in low and moderate income communities, a lot of like these, so I think she read a paper, she was telling me about childhood obesity and this kind of thing, how it, disproportionately is found in low and moderate income communities. And one of the things there is because either they don't have access to, you know, sort of the the sort of the overall structure, right, to lead sort of, healthy eating habits and healthy exercise, because you can't really have a gym membership, for example, right? It's usually very expensive, and so one of the things that my wife is actually working on is to bring yoga, mindfulness, meditation type things, and also healthy and budget friendly cooking. Putting all of those things together and presenting it to these communities where they can actually help themselves. And because for doing yoga, you kind of just need open space, and imagine you could do it in a park even. And so just putting that program together is something that she's very passionate about.
That is beautiful and important. I developed over quarantine a yoga practice myself, and I started meditating a few years ago, and the combination of those two things has done so much positive good for me. And I always think about like, wow, this is free. I use the Nike app for yoga, and I use YouTube to find meditations, and it's free, and it makes my life so much better. I think about all the time how much
Absolutely.
people could benefit from that if they were just aware of how much they could benefit from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So my last question for you, closing
Sure.
question, one word that represents Zimbali to you and why?
Yeah, I'd have to say the word would be hope. I think one of the things that probably the most important thing for us here at Zimbali is to provide hope to communities and our users, and so that they can take charge of their own, feel empowered and take charge of their own financial freedom and financial future. And hope is what keeps us going. And I think we as a society, something that keeps us progressing, right, in spite of adversities, in spite of challenges, is hope. And so one of the things I think that we really want to bring to the helm is this notion of hope. And I strongly believe that Zimbali can definitely make a very positive change to a lot of the challenges that we're seeing today.
Okay, well, this has been an incredible conversation. I've learned so much. I hope that everyone watching, you did too. This is Dr. Sriram Nagaraj. I'm Jordan Strudwick. We are part of Zimbali Networks, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great one.
Thank you.